The town of Hollow Creek was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Nestled amidst rolling hills and whispering willows, it held a stillness that felt heavier than it should. The trees seemed to murmur secrets to each other, their leaves rustling in a language only they understood. The old clinic, perched on the edge of town like a watchful crow, added to the unsettling tranquility. Its presence was a constant reminder of the town's forgotten past, a relic that seemed to watch over the town with a silent, eerie vigilance. Its paint peeled, and ivy crawled up its walls like grasping fingers. The building seemed to be slowly consumed by nature, as if the earth itself was trying to reclaim it. Locals gave it a wide berth, their eyes darting nervously towards its darkened windows. They avoided speaking about it openly, but their hushed conversations hinted at a deep-seated fear. They spoke of strange occurrences, hushed whispers of things unseen and unheard, but deeply felt. Stories of shadows moving on their own, of whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves.
Emily, new to Hollow Creek, remained oblivious to the town's disquiet. She was a stranger in a strange land, unaware of the undercurrents of fear that ran through the town. She saw the clinic as simply a relic of a bygone era, its worn facade a testament to time's passage rather than a harbinger of something sinister. To her, it was just another old building, nothing more. However, her perception would soon change. The clinic held secrets that were waiting to be uncovered, and Emily was about to step into a world she never knew existed. A persistent cough had been plaguing her, and with no other medical facility for miles, Emily found herself walking up the creaking steps of the clinic. Each step seemed to echo in the stillness, a reminder of the isolation she felt. Her breath caught in her throat as a cold wind rustled the leaves around her. The wind seemed to carry whispers, as if the trees were trying to warn her of something. The heavy oak door groaned as she pushed it open, and Emily stepped inside. The sound echoed through the empty halls, a stark contrast to the silence that had enveloped her outside. The air within was thick with the scent of dust and disinfectant, a peculiar mixture that pricked at her nostrils. It was as if the building itself was trying to cleanse away the years of neglect. The waiting room was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the corners and obscuring the faded floral wallpaper. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. An unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock in the corner. Each tick seemed to count down to an unknown event, adding to the sense of foreboding.
As Emily approached the reception desk, a shiver ran down her spine. The desk was covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it hadn't been used in years. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, her every move scrutinized by unseen eyes. The sensation was almost palpable, making her skin prickle with unease. Her every move scrutinized by unseen eyes. The shadows seemed to shift and move, as if something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself.
You must be Emily. I'm Dr. Carter. Please come in.
A voice smooth as silk cut through the silence, wrapping around Emily like a velvet cloak. A tall, slender man emerged from the shadows, his smile disarmingly charming, yet there was something almost too perfect about it. His eyes, however, held a glint that made Emily uneasy, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. Despite her apprehension, Emily found herself drawn to Dr. Carter's charismatic presence, as if an invisible thread was pulling her closer. He moved with an almost unnatural grace, his every gesture precise and controlled, like a dancer performing a well-rehearsed routine. His voice, a soothing baritone, seemed to calm the storm of unease brewing within her, each word a balm to her frayed nerves.
Don't worry, dear Emily, I'm here to help. Together, we'll uncover what's troubling you.
His words were reassuring, yet Emily couldn't help but feel a prickle of doubt, a nagging voice in the back of her mind warning her to be cautious. She followed him down a narrow hallway, the scent of antiseptic growing stronger with each step, mingling with the musty odor of old wood and dust. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced individuals in antiquated medical garb, their gazes seemingly following her every move, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Dr. Carter led her into a small examination room, the door creaking ominously as it closed behind them. The air here was stale and cold, sending another involuntary shiver down Emily's spine, her breath visible in the frigid air. A single examination table stood in the center of the room, illuminated by a flickering overhead light that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The rest of the room was shrouded in an unnerving gloom, the corners swallowed by darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own.
Now then, let's have a look at what's troubling you, shall we? His tone was gentle, yet there was an undercurrent of something more sinister.
Dr. Carter's voice, though still smooth, held a new edge, a subtle shift that made Emily's heart race. A subtle shift that heightened Emily's sense of unease, her instinct screaming at her to run, yet her feet remained rooted to the spot. Time seemed to slow, each tick of the clock echoing loudly in the oppressive silence, amplifying her anxiety. Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but finding none. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. Dr. Carter extended a hand towards her, his fingers long and pale like the tendrils of a ghost. "Shall we begin?" he asked, his voice a whisper that sent chills down her spine. Emily hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached out to take his. The moment stretched into eternity, the air thick with tension and unspoken fears. Their hands met and a jolt of cold shot through her as if she had touched ice. Dr. Carter's grip was firm, yet there was an unsettling chill to his touch. Emily steeled herself, a mix of fear and determination etched on her face. She knew she had to see this through, no matter what lay ahead. The room seemed to grow darker, the single light source flickering as if struggling to stay alive. The shadows danced around them, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Dr. Carter's gaze bore into her, intense and filled with secrets she couldn't begin to fathom. "Let's uncover the truth," he said, his voice a low murmur that resonated in the stillness. Emily took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever was to come. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. As the door slowly closed behind them, sealing them in the room together, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The examination was a blur of cold instruments and Dr. Carter's probing touch. The metallic clink of the tools sent shivers down Emily's spine, each one colder than the last. She could feel the chill of the instruments even before they touched her skin, a prelude to the discomfort that followed. Emily felt a growing sense of disorientation, the doctor's questions echoing strangely in her ears. It was as if the room itself was conspiring against her, the walls closing in, the air growing thicker. Each question seemed to come from a distance, distorted and warped, making it hard for her to focus. He listened to her heartbeat, his face unreadable, his eyes holding a strange intensity. The rhythmic thumping in her chest felt amplified, each beat a reminder of her vulnerability. His gaze never wavered, piercing through her as if searching for something hidden deep within.
Interesting.
He murmured, more to himself than to Emily. His words were barely audible, a whisper that seemed to carry a weight of its own. She strained to catch the meaning, but it eluded her, adding to her growing unease. He ran his fingers lightly over her skin, sending a jolt of fear through her. The touch was both gentle and invasive, a contradiction that left her feeling exposed and helpless. She shuddered, unable to suppress the reaction, her body betraying her fear. His touch lingered too long, his eyes burning into her with an unnerving intensity. It was as if he was trying to read her very soul, to uncover secrets she didn't even know she had. The intensity of his gaze made her want to look away, but she found herself unable to break the connection.
Very interesting indeed.
What is it, Doctor?
Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt heavy on her tongue, each one a struggle to release. She needed answers, but feared what they might be. She tried to sit up, to pull away from his touch, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room spun around her, the edges blurring and shifting. She felt as if she was on the verge of losing consciousness, her strength ebbing away. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows around her twisting and contorting. They danced on the walls, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to mock her. The once familiar space had turned into a nightmarish landscape, each shadow a potential threat. Dr. Carter chuckled, a low, chilling sound. It was a sound devoid of warmth, filled with a sinister undertone that sent chills down her spine. His amusement at her plight was evident, adding to her growing sense of dread.
Just a little procedure, my dear. Nothing to be concerned about.
His words did nothing to quell the rising panic within Emily. Instead, they only served to heighten her fear, the casual tone contrasting sharply with the gravity of the situation. She could feel her heart racing, the panic threatening to overwhelm her. She tried to speak, to protest, but her voice caught in her throat. The words refused to come. Trapped by her fear, she could only manage a strangled sound, her desperation evident in her eyes. He produced a syringe, the needle glinting ominously under the flickering light. It was a sight that filled her with dread, the sharp point promising pain and the unknown. The liquid within was dark, almost black, and it moved with an unnatural viscosity. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a malevolent presence contained within the glass. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Emily's growing haze. It was a primal reaction, her body recognizing the danger even as her mind struggled to comprehend it. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, leaving her breathless and terrified. She knew she had to escape, but her body refused to cooperate, leaving her trapped in a nightmare of her own making. He led her down a hallway she hadn't noticed before, a dark and narrow passage that seemed to exude a palpable sense of dread. The air grew colder, the scent of antiseptic overwhelmed by something metallic and cloying. Emily's legs felt like lead, her steps heavy and uncertain. They reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was made of thick, dark wood, and a tarnished brass handle adorned its center. Dr. Carter hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the handle. His touch seemed to make the metal colder, sending a shiver through Emily. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering gas lamp, casting long dancing shadows across the space. The walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of jars, each containing something unidentifiable floating in murky liquid. Strange instruments lay scattered across a central table, their polished surfaces reflecting the flickering light in a macabre display. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and something else, something ancient and fundamentally wrong.
Emily felt a scream building in her chest, a primal terror clawing at the edges of her sanity. This wasn't a clinic.